Indian Terrace was a quiet neighborhood until Mrs. Morse moved in. Her house stood out not for its beauty, but because she was the neighbor from hell. Mrs. Morse was a formidable woman with a sharp tongue and known for causing trouble. From the moment she moved in, she made it clear that she would not be an easy neighbor to live next to. At first, it was small things. She would complain about the noise from children playing, the barking of dogs, or the sound of lawnmowers on a Saturday morning. But as the months went by, her behavior became more and more outrageous. She would call the police at all hours of the night over the slightest disturbances, real or imagined. She would leave angry notes on her neighbors' doors, accusing them of all manner of offenses. She even poisoned one of her neighbor's dogs and spanked one of the neighbor's kids. She even went around and spray painted the neighbor's cars. She started spraying graffiti on her neighbors' homes late at night when everyone was indoors. Her spray-painted messages were filled with insults and accusations, causing distress and outrage among the residents. She even went so far as to plant weeds in her neighbors' gardens and then complain to the homeowners association about the unkempt appearance of their yards. Despite numerous attempts by her neighbors to reason with her, Mrs. Morse remained steadfast in her ways. The neighbors decided to call the police. However, despite getting arrested several times, nothing would stop her. She seemed to take pleasure in causing misery to those around her, and nothing anyone said or did could change her. As time went by, the neighborhood became resigned to living next to the neighbor from hell. But then, one day, without warning, Mrs. Morse put her house up for sale. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief, but they couldn't help but wonder why she had finally decided to leave. As it turned out, Mrs. Morse received an offer on her house that was too good to refuse. She moved out, leaving behind a neighborhood that was finally free from her torment. And as the years went by, the memory of the neighbor from hell faded, replaced by the peace and tranquility that had once defined Indian Terrace. With Mrs. Morse gone, the neighborhood began to thrive in ways it hadn't before. The children played freely in the streets without fear of reprimand, and the adults could finally enjoy their gardens and outdoor spaces without the threat of complaints. New neighbors moved in, and the sense of community that had been stifled by Mrs. Moore's presence began to blossom. Block parties were held, and friendships were formed that would last a lifetime. The neighborhood became known as one of the friendliest and most welcoming in the area, a far cry from its previous reputation. As for Mrs. Morse, she seemed to have faded into thin air. Some said she moved to a retirement community, while others claimed she had moved in with family out of state. Whatever the truth may have been, the neighborhood was grateful to have her gone. Years passed, and the story of the neighbor from hell became little more than a cautionary tale told to new residents. The memory of Mrs. Morse lingered, but it was a reminder of how far the neighborhood had come rather than a source of fear. And so, Indian Terrace lived up to its name once more, a peaceful and harmonious community where neighbors looked out for one another, and the memory of the neighbor from hell was nothing more than a distant memory.